Dallas Walker Smythe was born March 9th, 1907. He was a political activist and researcher who contributed to a political economy of communications. Dallas Walker Smythe was born in Regina, Saskatchewan, Canada. His father ran a hardware store in Regina, and his mother was a nurse from another town. They married in 1906. As a child, he almost died of the flu, and subsequently his family moved to Pasadena, California, in search of a healthier climate. Encouraged by his junior college economics teacher, Smythe wrote an essay for a national contest. He won $100. This encouraged him to pursue economics and become a teacher. Smythe was shy in junior college and didn't date much. He eventually did get married. He finished his degree at the University of California, Berkeley, achieving his A.B. in economics in 1928. Later that year, he entered a Ph.D. economics program at Berkeley, where he undertook a 7-year thesis on the East San Francisco transit system. He worked for 14 years in various government departments as an economist. He died September 6, 1992. He believed the research it should be used to develop knowledge that could be applied to policies in support of public interest and the disenfranchised private capital. He focused his research on mass media and telecommunications. Some of his main ideas included the invisible triangle and the audience commodity. Much of his efforts were the result of his attempts to differentiate between administrative and critical communications research. On the Audience Commodity and Its Work by Dallas W. Smythe is 26 pages. It was published in Dependency Road Communication, Capitalism, Consciousness in Canada, from pages 22 to 51. It was published in Norwood, New Jersey, by Albax in 1981. The references range from the years 1927 to 1978. Smythe begins by saying, to suggest that the mass media audience is a commodity and that the audience's work is to raise many questions which unsettle established ways of thinking. As most audience work centers in the home, all the other function of family becomes more involved in considering the implications of the proposition. He explains that he's referring to marital relations, child care and development, leisure time activities, consumer expenditures, decision makings. All these functions are somehow involved with audience work. Beyond these, the family life of audience work definitely influences it, and it's another focus of the family. Traditional behavior research and its popular market research is simply self-interest, irrelevant to complex processes, and Smythe basically analyzes how all of these things are disconnected and their relationships kind of emerge in a social process. Smythe basically says that there may be two models of theory: subjective, idealist concepts, or objective and realistic concepts. Smythe argued that to be an objective and realist theory, that is the key. Before entering into explanation of a realistic theory, it is necessary to state why theory concerning the mass media and their principal product has been subjective and idealist. He explains that mass communications have defined principal products such as messages, information, images, meanings, entertainment, education, orientation, appearances. They all have a different purpose and effect. Smythe continues to argue that there is a material base of work which people must recognize in capitalism. Food, clothing, all these things must pay off for the advertiser. At the same time, adequate income to meet demands sometimes requires sacrifices, and the values of family are achieved with different demands. There's a tension for the advertisers and practical consciousness. Basically, to put it briefly, you have to be realistic and understand that power is affecting the outcome of the contradictory processes. Smythe talks a lot about Keynesian tradition. He talks about different Marxist and different Lenin and all kinds of different functions of advertising and how mass communication on behalf of monopoly capitalism has been shown. Again, this is from 1981, so the things he's talking about go back to times before he wrote this work. Essentially, he says the secret is that for human beings, work involves both thinking and application, testing ideas in practice. The link between thinking and practice, or theory, it has to be separated. It's the basic power struggle between capital and labor. At the time he wrote this in 1981, the markets were for radio and television. The audiences were very different. They had different stations, the expenditures. Of course, newspapers were still there, but they weren't as prevalent, even though they were definitely a staple. A documentary was considered discounted. Often the price was a lot cheaper than other types of television programs. Smythe also talks about how people paid for television. On his charts, he provides, there's no Hulu, Netflix, no streaming. Of course, internet wasn't really common, but it just talks about how people, they had invested in TVs and repairs and cable, and basically the advertising on commercial and radio, they resulted in audience members paying directly for them, and so advertising paid for itself. He also wanted to recognize that the economic role, he's not trying to minimize the importance of its own right, just Smythe was very much communicating that there were many comparative choices, and the audience had to realize that this is what was happening in the mass media. Of course, increasingly awareness had become a thing, just like now. Overall, Smythe just wanted people to know that, time would show what people bought, under what conditions they were, and it's an endless theory to consider. He provided different figures for television, radio, and newspapers, and talked about how free time really had lessened, and this has to do a lot with the mass media. He concludes this work talking about how it's been noticed that, traditions are changing, free time is changing, the work hours are changing, and mass media is also changing. But a historical analysis of the rise of mass media will show that available actions, there's contradiction, advertising, media, the mysticism of the technological trap by which audiences are tied to hardware, software, and technique is definitely in effect. So in order to dig deeper into the process of which audience work is a part, is necessary to consider how we got this way. Smythe has a lot more information on how we must review some history of monopoly capitalism.